Imagine this. You invite your own father to stay in your home. You trust him, you love him. He raised you. But then one night, your wife walks into his room. Not because she's scared, not because she needs help, but because she has a plan so dark, so twisted, that when it fails, she screams out loud, and suddenly, the man you call dad is accused of something he never did. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the heartbreaking story of a father, a son, and a wife whose dangerous lie almost destroyed an entire family. Stay with me till the very end, because the truth will shock you. The night air was still, heavy with silence, the kind of silence that made the faintest whisper sound like thunder. In David and Emily's home, the living room glowed softly under the warm light of a lamp. On the surface, it looked like the perfect picture of family harmony. David, tall and strong, his skin smooth and dark like polished ebony, sat comfortably on the couch. Beside him was Emily, his white wife, her head leaning gently against his shoulder, a soft smile resting on her lips. Across from them sat Mr. James, David's father. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, but his presence filled the room with quiet authority. He was a man who carried the weight of life with dignity. His broad shoulders had once worked the land and carried the burdens of fatherhood, but even in his later years, his spirit remained unbroken. He watched his son and daughter-in-law with the calm eyes of a man who had seen enough of life to know both its sweetness and its storms. The laughter that filled the air was genuine, at least from David. He loved evenings like this. Family clothes, the smell of tea in the air, stories flowing freely. Emily played her part perfectly. She giggled at her husband's jokes, leaned into him when he spoke, and called Mr. James Dad with a tone so warm it could melt stone. But behind her smile, behind the sparkle in her eyes, something dangerous lurked, something no one else could see. Emily's gaze lingered. When David wasn't looking, her eyes would rest on Mr. James. She watched the way his hands, strong despite his age, curled around his teacup. She noticed a firmness in his voice when he spoke, the quiet authority that seemed to flow from him without effort. Mr. James wasn't just a man to her anymore. He was temptation. It started innocently enough, a fleeting thought, a small curiosity. Perhaps it was just her mind wandering, a strange attraction she would dismiss. But the more she saw him, the harder it became to ignore. What began as a fleeting spark grew into a flame, and soon that flame threatened to burn everything around her. Emily tried to shake it off at first. She told herself she loved David. She reminded herself that Mr. James was her husband's father, a boundary that no one should cross. But every time she saw him, the boundary blurred, and slowly, quietly, she began to nurture the dangerous desire growing inside her. One night, she found herself in the kitchen. The house was dark, everyone preparing to sleep. She tiptoed in, craving water, and found Mr. James already there. He stood by the sink, his back straight, his presence filling the small space. "Oh, Dad," Emily said softly, startled but smiling. "Couldn't sleep?" Mr. James turned, his eyes kind but tired. "Just needed some water," he replied. His voice was calm, gentle, but carried the weight of a man used to being obeyed. Emily stepped closer, her perfume trailing behind her. "Let me help you with that," she said, taking the glass from his hand, her fingers brushing against his. It was a brief touch, innocent in appearance, but it sent a shiver through her. To Mr. James, it meant nothing. To Emily, it meant everything. That night, as she lay beside David, she could not stop thinking about it. The touch replayed in her mind over and over, filling her with a thrill she couldn't explain. She knew it was wrong. She knew it was dangerous. But that only seemed to make it more exciting. The days that followed saw subtle changes in her. When Mr. James visited, Emily dressed differently. Her clothes fit tighter. Her necklines dipped lower. She made excuses to be near him, offering to fix him a drink, to adjust the curtains, to serve his meals. David never noticed. He trusted her too much to suspect anything. To him, she was the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. But Mr. James began to notice. At first, he brushed it off as imagination. Maybe she was just friendly. Maybe she didn't realize the effect of her actions. But as days passed, the truth became harder to ignore. Her glances lingered too long. Her touches were too deliberate. Her words carried too much weight. One evening, as he sat in his room, Mr. James whispered to himself, "This is dangerous. She's my son's wife. Lord, give me strength." He kept his distance as much as he could, but Emily was relentless. Every move she made was calculated. She dropped the towel in front of him one afternoon, bending slowly to pick it up, her eyes flicking up to see his reaction. She leaned too close when pouring his tea, her hand brushing his shoulder lightly. She laughed too warmly at his stories, her eyes shining in ways they shouldn't. Mr. James avoided her gaze, but inside, he was unsettled. He knew if he spoke up, it could destroy everything. What son would believe that his wife was trying to seduce his father? The thought terrified him. Emily, however, grew bolder. One late evening, while David was in the study, Emily entered the living room where Mr. James sat watching television. She wore a robe, thin and loosely tied, revealing far more than modesty allowed. "Oh, I didn't know you were here, Dad," she said, pretending to be surprised. But she didn't leave. She walked in and sat across from him, crossing her legs slowly, deliberately. Mr. James gripped the arm of his chair, his eyes fixed on the television. His chest pounded, not from desire but from fear. He could feel her gaze burning into him, daring him to respond. He forced himself not to look. That night, he lay awake, his mind heavy with dread. Emily was building a trap, and he was caught in the middle. In her own room, Emily stared at her reflection in the mirror. She painted her lips with a soft shade of red, smiling as she whispered to herself, "He won't resist forever. Tonight, I'll make my move." She slipped out of the room, her feet light on the floorboards, her robe swaying gently. The hallway was dark, the silence thick. She stood before Mr. James' door, her hand hovering over the knob. Her heart raced with excitement. Slowly, carefully, she pushed it open. Inside, Mr. James lay half asleep, the sound of his steady breathing filling the room. He stirred as the door creaked, his eyes blinking open. What he saw made his blood run cold. Emily stepped inside, her lips curved into a wicked smile. The trap was ready to be sprung. Emily stood at the door, her shadow stretching across the room as the faint moonlight slipped through the curtains. Mr. James stirred in his bed, his senses instantly alert the moment he realized someone was there. He sat up slowly, his heart pounding, and when his eyes adjusted, the figure became clear. "Emily!" She stepped closer, her robe swaying open just enough to reveal her intentions. Her lips glistened faintly from the lipstick she had applied in secret, and her eyes locked on him like a predator on prey. "Emily!" Mr. James' voice was hoarse, almost breaking. "What are you doing here?" She tilted her head, a smile curling at the corner of her mouth. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. I needed someone who understands." Mr. James pushed himself upright, his chest tightening with dread. "You shouldn't be here. Go back to your husband. This is not right. But Emily stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. The touch made him flinch. "Why pretend, Dad?" she whispered. "I see the way you look at me. You feel it too." The words cut through him like a knife. His whole body shook, not with temptation, but with fury. "You are my son's wife," he snapped, his voice trembling with anger. "Don't ever say such a thing again." He pushed her hand away and stood to leave. But Emily, cunning and quick, let out a scream so sharp it pierced the silence of the night. She stumbled backward, pulling her robe tighter around herself, and collapsed to the floor, sobbing. David burst into the room seconds later, his chest rising and falling with panic. His eyes darted between his father, standing rigid with shock, and his wife, crumpled on the floor in tears. "He tried to touch me," Emily cried out, her voice breaking. "Your father, he came after me." The word struck David like a hammer. His breath caught his throat, his mind spinning in disbelief. He turned to his father, his voice raw. "Dad, what is she saying?" Mr. James raised his hands, his face twisted in pain. "No, son, she's lying. I would never, never cross such a line. She came into my room. I told her to leave." But Emily's sobs drowned his words. She clung to David, trembling, painting herself as the victim. "I was so scared," she whispered through tears. "I thought he was going to—" Her voice broke again, and she buried her face in her husband's chest. David's heart shattered. He loved his father. He trusted him. But the sight before him, his wife broken, trembling, was impossible to ignore. His voice shook with rage and sorrow as he looked at Mr. James. "How could you?" The older man's lips quivered. "Son, please, look at me. You know who I am. You know the life I've lived. I would never betray you like this." But David turned away, holding Emily tightly. The room filled with silence heavier than stone. That night, the bond between father and son cracked, poisoned by a lie. The days that followed were darker than any storm. At the breakfast table, David barely spoke to his father. His eyes, once filled with admiration, now burned with suspicion. Mr. James ate quietly, the shame pressing down on him like chains he couldn't escape. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the wound was too raw. His son had chosen to believe his wife over him, and that truth cut deeper than any blade. Emily, meanwhile, played her role perfectly. She stayed close to David, whispering fears into his ear, pretending to flinch whenever Mr. James entered the room. "I can't be near him," she would say, her voice trembling. And David, blinded by love, comforted her, tightening the distance between himself and his father. But lies are fragile things. They crack under pressure. And Emily's lie was about to crumble. One afternoon, a family friend came to visit. She was a sharp-eyed woman, one who had known the family for years. As she sipped her tea, she noticed something odd. Emily's eyes didn't look afraid when they rested on Mr. James. Instead, there was something else, something that lingered too long, something that spoke not of fear but of desire. The friend said nothing, but the thought settled in her mind like a stone in water, sinking deeper with each passing moment. That evening, fate played its hand. David, returning home earlier than expected, walked past the bedroom door and froze. Inside, Emily's voice drifted out, low but clear. She was on the phone. "You should have seen it," she laughed softly. "He looked terrified when I screamed." David believed every word. I fooled them both. The words sliced through David like a blade. His vision blurred as rage and heartbreak collided in his chest. He pressed his back against the wall, his fists trembling. His world, once steady, now collapsed under the weight of betrayal. That night, David confronted her. His eyes blazed as he stormed into the room. "Tell me the truth," he shouted, his voice shaking the walls. "You lied about my father, didn't you?" Emily's face drained of color. She stammered, her lies tumbling from her lips, but her confidence cracked under the fire of his gaze. David repeated the words he had heard, his voice a whip. "You bragged about fooling me. You mocked me." The truth spilled out, ugly and undeniable. Emily had woven the web, and now she was caught in it. The house shook with the weight of her betrayal. David's heart felt as if it had been ripped from his chest. He had loved her, trusted her, defended her, and she had used that trust as a weapon against the very man who gave him life. In the days that followed, the marriage disintegrated. Emily's lies were laid bare, her mask shattered. She was left alone, consumed by the poison of her own making. Mr. James, though deeply scarred by the accusation, stood tall once more. His pain was heavy, but his spirit refused to bend. When David finally came to him, tears streaming down his face, he fell to his knees. "I doubted you," David wept. "I let her lies blind me. I turned my back on you. Forgive me, Dad." Mr. James lifted him up, pulling him into an embrace. His voice trembled with emotion. "A father's love does not break, son. You are my blood. We will heal together." And in that moment, the bond that had been broken was reforged, stronger than before. The house, once suffocated by shadows, began to breathe again. The laughter returned, slow but steady, the warmth of family flickering back to life. Yet the scars remained, a reminder of the storm they had endured. David carried the lesson deep within him. Trust is sacred, love can be blind, and betrayal often hides behind the sweetest smile. He would never forget how close he had come to losing everything, not because of truth, but because of lies. And Mr. James, though marked by the pain of accusation, walked forward with the strength of a man who had survived the fire and emerged unburned. The night was calm again, but this time the silence carried wisdom, the kind of wisdom only pain could teach.